Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Compassionate Cowgirl, a show in which I teach you how to connect with your horse using compassion, innovation, and self-awareness. And this is the Mystic Experiment series where I go about demonstrating these techniques using Mystic, who is a previously wild and previously untrainable Mustang from South Scenes, Oregon. Now, in today's episode, this is definitely going to be for you if you have wanted to incorporate the positive reinforcement and you've tried it, but you have trouble keeping your horse engaged. Perhaps your horse has a tendency to be pretty introverted and kind of shut down. Those horses are especially kind of tricky to keep engaged sometimes, unless you are using the technique I'm going to show you today, which I discovered with Mystic in my journey with her. Up until I discovered this technique, I would get so frustrated because I would just lose her focus. She would kind of look away and then she'd, walk away and she might come back, or I might have just had to end the session because I couldn't get her to want to engage with me. So that's how I kind of came across the importance of these techniques. The first one that I'm going to talk to you guys about is the A to B technique and also the redirection technique. And you'll see how they really work together and complement each other throughout this episode. Now, the way that I'm going to teach you guys is we are going to head to the office and cover, hey Kodiak, this is one of my Mustangs. And we're going to cover the theory. And then after that, we're going to head out and look at this in action with Mystic in the field. And then finally, we're going to meet over a cup of tea and talk about kind of the deeper layers of this and how we can apply it to our own journeys of self-growth and transformation. And really connecting with any horse or human begins with connecting with yourself. So this is a really important part of the episode. Hopefully you'll stick with me until we get there. And before we dive in, I wanted to share a testimonial. Today's testimonial is from Denise, and she is an Academy member. And Denise says, I am working with a ranch colt that is suddenly having trouble with anything hanging or flopping on or off his side. It all started on a really windy day when I swung my legs on his back. He saw them from his right eye and jumped away from it. What a relief it is to know that I don't have to cowboy him and make him do this no matter what. That it's okay to step back down the ladder and start over, and that doing so will make this colt more solid and confident in the long run. God bless you, Maddie, for showing us the truth in horse training. Wow, that is an awesome, awesome revelation on your part, Denise, and a great way of putting this stuff into practice. So I think that if you guys struggle with that, our last episode, How to Help Your Horse Get Unstuck, is one that we really dive into, the feelings that Denise was coming across with that. So thank you, Denise, for sharing. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your horsemanship journey. I truly appreciate the work that you're doing with your horse. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so in the last episode, we talked about how to get unstuck with your horse and break behaviors down into really small steps called approximations and implement shaping. So that was huge in helping Mystic through her altering process. But there was still something else that I needed to look at in order to keep her motivation and keep her wanting to engage, because no matter how small of steps I would break down the haltering process into, I still would run into her shutting down. She would kind of turn away, and then once she was shutting down, a lot of times she would leave, and then I would just have to end the session. So I didn't have any way of keeping her engaged. And I think that that's pretty common with introverts, especially for horses who have been shut down, and then we say, oh, well, the horse isn't food motivated, positive reinforcement doesn't work with them. But no. Behold, there is something we are missing yet again. So what I discovered covered was the importance of 2 methods to bring more choice into the training and keep building and keep a steady behavioral momentum built, where she's doing one behavior and getting reinforced and then another behavior getting reinforced, and it's just really steady, and this rate of reinforcement is really consistent so that she's staying really engaged. And so what I was doing before was I basically just needed to get 2 behaviors done with her. I need to be able to halter you and pick up your feet. So I would go out to Mystic's paddock where she was, and I had been using clicker training, and I said, okay, I'm just gonna work on haltering and getting your and picking up your feet so that I can just get you taken care of until I really dive into your training. Well, that did not work because I was focusing on 2 behaviors that she didn't really feel comfortable with. So overall, her engagement would be down throughout the session, and she would choose slower and think more and do pauses and kind of shut down a little bit. So her reinforcement rates would go down, right? So what is the solution? The solution is twofold. It's the redirection technique. If your horse says no to a behavior and they go and kind of lose interest and don't want to do it. And the other technique is the A to B technique, which is trying to be more proactive before the horse loses interest, going on and doing a different behavior. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail. So with the A to B technique, say I'm working on haltering with Mystic or picking up her feet, and I notice her starting to chew a little bit slower on the food. I notice her starting to kind of pause between repetitions and seem like she's shutting down just a little bit. At that point, I know I'm getting close to her threshold of how many of these fear-inducing uncomfortable behaviors of the haltering and picking up her feet go. I know I'm getting on the verge of how much she can handle with it. So before I lose her interest and lose her engagement and she goes and walks off or whatever, or just stands there unresponsive because she was just so shut down. Before that happens, I'll shift and go to a different behavior. So there's 2 kind of types of behaviors. There's the A level behavior and the B level behavior. The A level behavior is something like the haltering or the picking up of the feet that kind of induces a little bit of fear and is something that they don't really like quite yet. They're like a little unsure of, requires a lot of effort of them. That's another way of putting it. A B level behavior is something really easy, something they have a really strong reinforcement history for. So it could be a behavior that they already enjoy doing, that they've already mastered. If you're just starting with a horse, especially, I love just sending them to a stationary target and touching cones, because that's something that they know how to do. It's easy to teach, it's simple to teach, and it's very low effort on their part. So that's a good B-level behavior. So with Mystic, what I would do is look at, okay, let's look at a little bit of haltering, and then before I lose your interest, hey, let's go send to these cones. And then go to a little bit of haltering and then go send to the cones. So I'm constantly going from the A behavior to the B behavior to keep her interest and engagement. Now, if I miss that threshold of how much she can handle with the haltering, or something sets her off or whatever, and she starts losing interest and actually goes to walk off and I kind of lose her, then maybe I'll still go to the targeting, okay? And so what that says is basically, you don't have to do the behavior I'm asking you to do in order to get reinforced. And it gives more choice and more control back to the horse. That becomes really important too for preventing like aggression in horses or any kind of species that you're working with around food. Because if they feel like they have to do this behavior that they don't want to do in order to get the food, then that's when we can see a little bit of aggression coming in as well, or them just losing interest and walking off like Mystic did. So that's the redirection technique. When she says no to haltering or no to picking up her feet, I said, okay, I see you're not ready to do that yet. How about targeting? And maybe you can say yes to that. And she's like, oh yeah, I can do that. So you build the behavioral momentum up, and then you revisit the haltering or the feet. And what happens is that they're going to be more successful at it. There's actually a study done with children who were test taking. And if they were given a difficult question, And then following that difficult question, they were given, I don't know, 3 or 5, I think it was, questions where they knew. Then they revisited that difficult question. They were much more likely to answer it correctly. It's a similar thing coming into practice with our horses here. So if we can build up that behavioral momentum and that rate of reinforcement and get them confident and enjoying the game, then when we represent that difficult question of the halter, for example, they're like, oh yeah, I got this. So that's how it works. Now, this is really different from negative reinforcement training, because with negative reinforcement training, once you start asking the horse for a behavior, you have to stay with the pressure until they get it. Otherwise, when you take the pressure away, you're reinforcing the behavior and you're actually doing more harm than good. So once you begin asking the horse for a behavior using negative reinforcement, pressure and release, you stay with the pressure until they give you just even a subtle sign in the correct direction before releasing. Now, a good trainer is going to see those little approximations and those little tries and reward the horse. But if you miss them, then you can kind of get yourself into trouble, because then the horse isn't offering anything, and then you're both frustrated, and then you release, and then they get rewarded for shutting down or fighting the pressure or whatever they were doing to avoid it. Now, there are some ways where you can allow the horse to have a release of pressure, but then send them into work, for instance, and then kind of set this behavior up as the lowest energy pathway so that they can have these kind of accidental releases and not necessarily get reinforced for them. And that's a strategy too I would use for working through some trauma with horses, and they need to kind of like reset their nervous system and their reaction and things. So there are ways to bring more choice into negative reinforcement, but by and large, there's much more room for choice in positive reinforcement training, because if the animal says no, they're not getting reinforced for saying no like they would be with the release of pressure that was asking the question. If you're not using the pressure to ask the question, or you're not using an amount large enough for it to be aversive, then the horse says no, and there's no accidental reward. They missed out on a chance to get reinforced, okay? And then you employ these other techniques I've talked about to build the behavior back up. So that's a huge advantage of positive reinforcement, is that it allows for us to give our horses more choice. Now, if you guys want a guide to explore some of the key differences between positive and negative reinforcement training, because there's a lot of little things like this that go on, then I have a downloadable guide for you if you click the link below. And it is the same guide I released in episode 1 of the Mystic Experiment series. So if you already downloaded it there, you're good. And as always, if you guys want to take these concepts deeper, then make sure and check out my 5 Golden Rules course, the 5 Golden Rules to the Horse-Human Connection. And rule number 2 actually is all about how we can provide choice for our horses in both positive and negative reinforcement training settings. When you give your horse choice, you're also going to increase their motivation. And by giving your horse choice through the redirection technique and the A to B technique, you increase their motivation to stay playing in the game, you increase their engagement, and you'll find that positive reinforcement training is possible with horses who are in the past have been very shut down or are very introverted. So this has been a game changer for Mystic and I. And with that, I think that we'll go ahead and head out into the field and put these things into action with Mystic. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start out by, this is interesting, that she's going to choose the halter there, which is good, because the haltering is what I would call the A-level behavior for her still, that causes a little bit of tension, okay? So the B-level behavior I'm going to be looking at is sending her to the target. Good, good. All the way. Looking for her nose to actually touch the target there. And this is the B-level behavior. It's just her sending target from one stationary cone target to the next. And this is something that is really easy for her to do, doesn't cause her any kind of tension or fear. Good. Is just kind of low energy, low effort, has a really strong reinforcement behavior or history. Okay, good. Target. So one of the A-level behaviors I'll look at is haltering. So once I've done some B-level, I'll come back over here to an A-level. And when I started doing this, I'm just going to go back to these very first few approximations, and that might have been all I did before I went back to a B-level behavior. Now, if she's stuck on the halter like that, instead of following me to the B behavior, then I might take her up on that idea and keep going with it, okay? But in the beginning, she wasn't like that. I had to go back to this B behavior before I actually lost her, okay? Mystic, target, good. But they'll give you feedback when they're ready to move on. Or when they've had enough of that A behavior and they've kind of met what's called their threshold, right? Their absolute maximum tolerance, good, for the behavior before they feel like they have to go into a reaction. So just keeping it a constant balance. Now, like we talked about, the difference between the redirection technique and the A to B technique is that the redirection technique is kind of an after the fact. So say I'm working with her on the halter and I kind of go past the number of approximations or repetitions that she feels comfortable offering. So I go and I push her beyond threshold, which again we'll talk about in our next episode actually. But that point just right before they go into reaction. So say I push her beyond her threshold and she goes to leave. Then at that point, to keep the rate of reinforcement up and to keep the session flowing and to build behavioral momentum, instead of saying you have to touch this halter to get a click in a tree, I would just send her to the cone or touch the handheld, go do something else that is more of a B-level behavior that she can handle. Okay, so she's maintaining this degree of control throughout the session. She doesn't feel like she has to do this to get a click and treat. Okay, and that's when you can get and see, you know, a lot of aggression and things like that. So that's the redirection technique after the fact. The A to B technique is going to a B-level behavior, but before she gets to the point where, like right there even. Okay, because see how now she's like, you went too far with me, now I'm going to go to the cone. So I might reinforce her for that. That's the redirection technique at work. That was a perfect example. So the A to B technique would have come in before she got to that point. I would have noticed that she was getting tense and said, okay, that's enough repetitions of the A-level behavior. Let's go back to the B-level behavior. Okay, and then you can see she's kind of grazing and is like, I'll just take this food instead, which again, I really like that she has access to the pasture. And with other horses, you know, in the arena and things, I love for them to have access to a hay net, because I don't want to be their only source of food to where they feel like they have to do it to get any kind of reinforcement. Okay, but I'll try to get her engagement again through asking her to target. Kind of move away a little bit. Ideally, she kind of looks back over here and then I'll ask her to target, because I don't necessarily want to go after her right now as she's grazing and ask her to target, because if that's something she finds reinforcing, I'm reinforcing then the grazing. Okay. See if I can just kind of step in front and maybe get your attention a little bit. Good. Target. Good. Good. Now she does know how to target my hand, but that's something I would just use with caution. Target. Good. Good. Target. Good. Target. Good. Okay, so let's build our confidence back up here with these B-level behaviors. Good. Target. Good. Good. Now I'm going to wait to go back to the halter until she's a little bit more immediate in her responses here and not thinking so much and thinking about shutting down or losing interest. So really build up that treats per minute ratio, build up that behavioral momentum so that she's feeling really good about this, and it's just like one reinforcement after the other. There, that's a lot better. See how there's less thinking time before I then return to a behavior like the halter on the ground there. She really likes that cone. Mystic, target, good, good. But that was better, right? I didn't lose her to the grazing. Good. Target, target, target. Mystic, target, good. Target, target, good, good, good. See that big breath out? So when she seems to get distracted, it's really her being on the verge of shutting down. So again, why this B-level work then is so important. Target, good, good. Target, good. So that might be all that I do with the halter before I then come back to this B-level behavior. Target, good, good, good. Okay. Target, good, good. Target, good. I like how she did think about going right by my hand target though to the halter, because again, that's harder for her. Good. So when you notice them holding their breath and you notice them taking longer to give you a response, those are all signs that it's probably you're getting close to threshold, probably time to move on to a B-level behavior to keep that rate of reinforcement up. Good. So right there, see how she kind of paused a little bit, but then she thought through and kept chewing. So I think I can keep going here. Good. Good. But the more hesitation there is, the more holding of the breath, pausing and not chewing, the more that kind of indicates it's time to go on to a B-level behavior. Good. And then I might actually just ask her to target from here and then go back to the cones. So that time, this is not the redirection. I actually like that she wants to stay on the halter, because that means that I did not push her past what her comfort zone was. So I might take her up on that offer a few times. Then this next time I'm going to ask her to send again. Good, good. Target, good. But that was an example of the A to B technique, because again, it's more of a proactive versus reactive that the redirection technique is. Trying to read her before she loses interest and go on to that B behavior. Good. Target. Good. All right, so I think that that's enough for this session. And now, let's go ahead. I'm gonna give Mystic an end of session signal here and we'll wrap up. And I will meet you guys back up at the house for some more talk over tea. So I will see you guys in just a moment. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed that training session with Mystic. I wanted to talk to you guys about letting your horse say no in training, because the redirection technique, it's all about letting the horse say no, right? If they say, no, I can't do that, well then, okay, how about this behavior? And the goal is to get the horse, like I was pointing out there, is to, instead of shutting down and losing motivation to partake in the session, instead maybe they'll offer something they can do. And then you take them up on that idea. So that's a really pretty progression I've seen with Mystic throughout her training, is now if she doesn't feel comfortable doing a behavior that I'm asking her to do, instead she'll just go and touch the cone or go offer something else that she can do, instead of me losing her altogether. So this allowing your horse to say no, if you've used negative reinforcement in the past, this was probably one of the biggest things for me that I had to get used to. Because with negative reinforcement, when you start asking, like we've talked about, you have to stay on with the pressure until they answer correctly. Otherwise you're rewarding, the behavior. So allowing your horse to say no, I think really requires a lot of self-awareness, especially if you kind of consider yourself a very type A, results-oriented person. This might be really hard. So I'm gonna give you guys an example. I was doing some performances with Zeus, my zebra, this past winter, spring, and I was doing a Meet the Mustangs in Arizona, which is when I kind of bring the Mustangs out, tell the story of the Mustangs, talk about equine behavior, and then at the end I bring the zebras in and I talk about zebras versus Mustangs and some more things on equine behavior. So Xena is like my queen zebra. She's like a star student, been there, done that, my steady Eddie, kind of, so to speak, for a zebra anyway. And however much they can be a steady Eddie. But anyways, she knows her stuff. And this particular day of the performance, Xena was in heat. And when a zebra is in heat, or at least Xena, all she does is pees and bites. So I thought I probably wouldn't have her be a part of the show. And I was just going to use Zeus. Well, this was Zeus's first time really going out without Xena. So that was a big deal. And Xena, we were doing it kind of out of the facility we'd been staying at. So Xena was in a paddock where they could still kind of see each other, but he was pretty far away from her. And he gets more protective of her when she's in heat too. So anyways, I'm already kind of setting it up in a way that I'm asking a lot of Zeus, and he's kind of nervous when he gets into the arena at first, kind of running around and settles in and starts to focus, but I only have him for so long until he kind of gets a little bit worried again, and then he settles in again. And so anyway, I asked him to lay down, and he's never said no to laying down. I mean, from the very beginning of his training, it's like never something I've had issues with. And I asked him to lay down, and he goes to, like, I think he's gonna lay down, and then he kind of gets worried and is looking at Xena again, and I'm like, oh boy, okay, well, let me ask again. And he's still not laying down. And I'm kind of like, okay, I guess I should stop asking. And I'm like thinking it's about to happen, and it's not happening. So I'm finally just like, okay, well, I think that's it for today, with Zeus. It was kind of going to be the finale, but it didn't happen. So then we moved on to something else. But he didn't lay down. And after that, we did like some pictures, and I met some people and talked with people. And then I went back into the arena, and I was going to take Zeus back to the paddock with Xena. And I was like, I bet now that the crowd is gone and things have kind of settled down again, let me ask him again and see, if he'll lay down. And still, nope. So then I go and I take him back to the paddock with Xena, and I'm like, surely now he'll lay down, and I'll just ask one more time. And I go to ask, didn't lay down. And at that point, it really required me to have a lot of strength to take his halter off, let him go, and leave the situation without accomplishing what I had set out to accomplish, which was the lay down. So here's the thing, is in that moment, I could have made him lay down. I know the techniques that I could have used, and I could have gotten him to lay down. But at what cost to the relationship would that have come? Because that would be paying a price. So when you shift your mindset from that results-oriented, results at any cost type of mentality to relationship first, you're more easily able to make the decision of allowing your horse to say no, right? So having that value offers you guidance in that kind of situation. It was still really difficult, I'm not gonna lie. And so I'll explain why. After this happened, I go through probably 20 to 30 minutes of just ego coming up and writing these stories of how you're a failure. You can't even get him to lay down, which now looking back sounds silly anyways, right? It's a zebra. You can't even get your zebra to lay down. How awful. But it really seemed awful in my head. I'm like, why are people even wanting to learn from me? I suck at this. Total ego stories blasting. And then I get out of this self-talk and I bring myself out of it, right? So I think that awareness comes in shorter and shorter amounts of time. So hopefully I'll get to the point where in the moment, right, when ego comes up, I'm like, oh, that's ego, right? But I let it go for 20 or 30 minutes. And then I was like, okay, what story are you writing here? Because this is not serving you. And what I realized was that my ego coming up and saying that I was a failure because I didn't get him to lay down, I was like, well, that is actually the greatest success of any trainer, right? Or any horsewoman that I would want to be, is someone who is able to put their relationship first with their animal, put their relationship before their pride, before their ego in that moment. To me, that is the greatest success ever, and doing that under pressure with a lot of people who paid to come and see, the animals perform and things. So anyways, that is my whole experience, one of them, on letting your horse say no, and why that can be difficult, especially if we're tying our worthiness and us being enough as a trainer or horse person into the animal's behavior and whether or not they say yes. Now, here's the other thing about allowing your horse to say no that's really interesting is that, and this goes with humans as well, but the question of, before you know that you can say no, are you really saying yes? So in actuality, to really give a true yes, you have to know that it's a possibility I say no. And what that means is that the times that they do say yes, it makes it all the more special, for one, because we know that they're saying yes because it's a true yes. They could say no, but they've chosen in that moment to say yes. And it requires a bit of trust to understand that just because your horse is saying no right now doesn't mean they're always going to say no. So the next day I got Zeus out because we were doing our immersion program, and I'm working with him and I ask him to lay down, lays down right away. So that's the beauty of positive reinforcement, because by allowing him to say no the day before, I didn't damage the behavior. In fact, I probably made it stronger because now he knows he has the option to say no, right? And he doesn't feel forced to do it. So, question of the day, I want to know, is it hard for you to let your horse say no? And maybe you haven't yet. And maybe the thought of that is really scary. I want to know, is it hard for you to let your horse say no, or to accept the idea of letting your horse say no? And what kind of stories come up for you? Is it something tied with your self-worth? Like if your animal performs or not, or their level of performance, do you tie that and equate that to your worth as a human? So I want to know, and comment below with your. I just want to take a moment to thank you guys for commenting, because I think I've said this before, but I'll say it again. You taking the time to comment your experience and be vulnerable is helping people, even if it's just one person, feel less alone on their journey. And that is so powerful. So thank you for being vulnerable, for sharing your comments, and I can't wait to read them. I think that that's all I have for this episode. But in the next episode, we're going to talk about working with a reactive horse and being able to read the horse's emotions before they react, which helps the horse feel safe, but also you stay safe. And we're going to take the lesson that we looked at today further, because with you hopefully could understand that I was trying to go to a B-level behavior before I lost the horse's attention or willingness, before they kind of went over threshold, so to speak. So we're going to talk about that more in the next episode, which will be released not next week, but the week after. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss the episode, make sure that you've subscribed. You've hit that subscribe button and also the bell next to it so that you're notified when that episode is released. And I can't wait to see you guys there. Also, if this resonated for you, please feel free to share to someone who you think would benefit from it. I'd love to get this message out to more. And then if you want to see Mystic's journey in more detail or learn more about positive reinforcement and how to go about that, then make sure you check out our Academy membership, and I will list that link for you guys as well. So with that, I will see you guys in the next episode, and thank you for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.